Welcome to Climate Channel, Climate Conversation with Kamru Chowdhury, episode 68. In this episode, we are going to discuss on our road to Sharm el-Sheikh COP27 after the Glasgow COP26 is done and dusted. We are now moving towards Sharm el-Sheikh. We have had Glasgow Climate Pact agreed upon in COP26 last November. And come November, we are going to meet at Sharm el-Sheikh. The preparatory work has already kicked off with the incumbent COP-presidency, COP26 President Alok Sharma and incoming COP-president from Egypt, Egyptian Foreign Minister, who has been designated as incoming COP-president. They met and hopefully the preparatory work is in full swing from right now. And we are also having very soon the first AWG-LCA meeting and also other meetings on our road to Sharm el-Sheikh. What are the major agenda items? Hard-nuts. The soft agenda items like fixing global adaptation goal, doubling or quadrupling climate adaptation finance, defining global adaptation goal, raising adaptation ambitions, loss and damage finance facility, and also Article 6, the robust architecture for market mechanism, non-market mechanism, how to price carbon, how to have carbon tax in very many countries, how to raise our NDCs. Because at Glasgow, we agreed to revisit all our national NDCs at Sharm el-Sheikh with a raised ambition. And we know tomorrow, day after tomorrow, the IPCC AR6 adaptation report is going to be released. What are there in the IPCC AR6 adaptation working group 2 report? Whatever we have heard from leaked document that 3.3 billion people are on the hook of adverse impact of climate change all over the world, which is in the upcoming IPCC working group 2 report. If that is so, how to take these 3.3 billion people who are on the hook of adverse impact of climate change, take them off the hook? It's a huge, huge challenge. It needs a lot of adaptation work. National adaptation plans are being formulated and they should be implemented. The implementation roadmap is important, and support for implementation roadmap of national adaptation plans are also of paramount importance, because community adaptation, ecosystem-based adaptations, transformative adaptations, and avoidance of maladaptation are essential. And those who are working onto the ground, they know how challenging is that effort. Without much ado, I would now like to request Anna Abad of Chatham House to set that tone, to initiate the climate conversation with Kamal Chaudhary at this episode.
Thanks so much, Kwamrul. It's a real pleasure to be here, and hi to my fellow panelists. So I think important progress was made at COP26, but obviously there is still a lot to be done. And COP27 and COP28 will be really important to ensure that we do not let the 1.5 degree targets slip out of reach. So in my initial intervention, I will point to a few areas which I think are most important in the run-up to COP27. One is this issue that Kwamrul mentioned earlier about the request for governments to come back to the table this year with enhanced NDCs. According to Climate Action Tracker, the 2030 commitments we have at present put us on track for 2.4 degrees of warming, which is of course way above the Paris Agreement's goals, and which will lead to really devastating consequences worldwide. Whether governments will actually do this, I think, well, it remains to be seen, and I think it will be quite challenging, frankly. I think it would be important that a few countries come out early this year with enhanced NDCs to kickstart the process and to signal that we are serious about implementing the Glasgow Climate Pact, that this is not just some commitment that we made, but which we are not going to live up to. And I think the current COP president, the UK, and also the incoming COP president, Egypt, can set a good example here and come out early this year with enhanced offers. I think it will also be really important to make progress on the climate finance agenda. That is, of course, a broad agenda. It's about mitigation, it's about adaptation, it's about loss and damage. And it's very tied to this ambition raising element. At COP26, we saw this just transition deal for South Africa. The US, UK, France, Germany, and the EU pledged 8.5 billion to support South Africa transition away from coal. Are there similar deals that can be done for other countries, and can this help emerging economies and developing countries be more ambitious? I think that's an important area to watch. I think it will also be important to continue fleshing out initiatives like the Build Back Better World initiative, the Global Gateway initiative, and also continue advancing GFANs. But as I said, this is more than about mitigation. As Kwamrul outlined, adaptation is super important and relevant, and we're already seeing loss and damage happening worldwide. So at COP26, wealthier nations pledged to double adaptation finance by 2025. Again, I think it's important that enough progress is made this year to show that this commitment will be delivered. So we need more bilateral pledges, and perhaps we can also see a roadmap of some sorts for how these funds will be raised to provide the confidence that this commitment is being taken seriously. We've been speaking about the 100 billion for years. This money has still not been delivered. That's key that takes place. And then I think it would be really important to find a workable way forward for loss and damage finance in the climate negotiations. Progress was made at COP26 again, but this is an issue that remains unresolved, and it will be interesting to see how the discussions go at the Glasgow Dialogue, which takes off now in June. And this is also an area which we at Chatham House will be looking at closely this year, how to bridge these divisions that we are seeing and how to mobilize these funds. A final area, I will stop because we have lots of excellent panelists yet to speak, but is about implementing commitments. There is a vast gap at present between what governments are saying that they're going to do and the policies they have put in place to actually get implementation underway. And we need to see countries, again, I think the COP presidents can lead the way on this, along with other nations, to put in place the policies that will get us there. And then to continue expanding these sectoral initiatives we saw announced at COP26 on phasing out coal, finance for fossil fuels overseas, etc., and ensuring that governments live up to what they have been saying. So I think I'll stop there. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Anna, for setting that. Felix Bongayer, what is your take, especially in terms of implementation, in terms of raising ambition, in terms
Well,
of, say, keeping the 1.5 degree alive?
it's very interesting. I'm delighted that Anna mentioned Carbon Tracker and their 2.4 degrees, because Carbon Tracker a couple of weeks ago also came up with the statistic that we have about 360 gigatons of emissions before we hit 1.5, which they predicted would be around 2029, which is broadly in line with the last assessment report from the IPCC. So if you're thinking about the NDCs and raising that ambition, we have to raise ambition. Now, implementation of that ambition is a very big question. And I think it's quite salutary at this moment in time that with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the idea of Europe's kind of energy insecurity issue, because they're so dependent on Vladimir Putin's Russia, you know, people like Franz Timmermans are talking very much about we need to really push more for renewable energies just from an energy security issue. So hopefully that's another driver in the mix, in addition to the need for climate security. But we also have the IPCC kind of working group 2 report sort of about to be launched. I missed the press conference yesterday, unfortunately. So I'm not too sure what their main points are. But this is going to be quite a big issue. And we have next week the MENA conference, I believe, on the build up to COP27. So I'll be interested to see what people's thinking is there. But yeah, we do have an awful lot to do on the implementation front. The financing is a huge issue. I was delighted to see the Bangladesh National Adaptation Plan this week. And you know, it makes you think, how are you going to get the funding to actually kind of implement this? And with everything being bracketed at COP26 for into vehicles this year for negotiation up to Sheikh Al-Sham, we have some very big issues to address. You know, there's an awful lot of money. You've got to work out how you're apportioning it. And I'd be interested to see how is that money going to be distributed, on what kind of a basis, once we actually mobilize that money. So any thoughts from anybody else, I'll be delighted to hear them.
Okay, thank you, Felix. And I would now like to ask Kilian Urs to give your perspective. What is your expectation? Kilian Urs.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Felix and Anna, for your, and I'm just gonna sort of carry on the conversation. But yeah, I think I was very saddened by the results of COP26 that we're only gonna be arrive at 2.4 degrees currently. And something else which very much I think should be incorporated in the next COP27 is youth. They have to be heard in the negotiation room. They have to be heard at the actual place where it's important for them to be at, because they're disproportionately affected by the results of climate change. And sort of carrying on what we're talking about, I think climate financing, carbon accounting is going to be very important for the coming COP27. And looking at different sectors, I'm going to go out of my own expertise, although what I look at is data, and that maybe does involve this as well. Military establishments at the moment are still one of the biggest polluters worldwide. And for example, the US won a blanket military exemption under the Kyoto Climate Accord, which, okay, in the 2015 Paris Agreement, it was removed, but their military emissions are voluntary. So I think it's very important that this is part of the discussion for COP27. It wasn't at COP26, but I think that we should be discussing the emissions of countries' military budget, especially when it comes to carbon accounting. Okay. Because, for example, There's a researcher in King's College London, and he says that under de Govere, and he says there's an underreporting is the norm. The data is either inaccessible or aggregated with non-military sources. For example, Canada reported emissions under multiple IPCC categories, reporting military flights under general transport and energy for bases under commercial institutional emissions.
Oh.
So I think these are things that we should be able to discuss for the coming COP. And of course, I'd like to hear what the others have to say, but thank you so much for...
Yeah, I will come back to you again. Kilian, thank you. I would now like to ask Ma Cleophas Oliver Merceda. What is your take? What is your perspective?
Yes, hello, good evening here in the Philippines. It's 10 o'clock in the evening. I'm connected in the private sector. I'm also in a professional organization. In our professional organization, it composed of several mechanical engineers coming from the industry, coming from the government, coming from the private and state colleges and universities. And we have also projects and programs that pertains to climate change and the impacts of climate change, because most of our practitioners design in the HVAC, those that produce the greenhouse gases, in the refrigeration and air conditioning. And we understand that our government has also programs and projects to mitigate and to adaptation of the climate change. We have the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. The Philippines is also a member of the signatories of the parties, and there are programs that we in the industry are mandated to comply. All our refrigeration or all our chillers should have a refrigerant that are environmentally friendly already. We are mandated that a certain date we need to have that chiller refrigerant that are not affecting the greenhouse gases. So basically, we in the industry are cooperating with our government to protect our environment.
Thank you. Tony, what is your perspective? You have been working in a couple of African countries.
Can't hear you.
Yes. Tony, over to you. You have to unmute, yes. Unmute, Tony. Unmute, Tony.
I did unmute. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Sorry. I thought I'd done that. Anyway, so we're basically getting on with the job. We're not waiting for the 100 billion. We are working with an organization in New York, and they have 500 million euros of EU carbon credits for biochar related projects in Africa. The project, my project, Climate Crisis Team, originally is focused around industrial hemp. However, we're broadening that out to include biochar, to include things like biogas and so on, and all things that will result in the end in a reduction in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So that's what we're concentrating on. And when I go to Kenya, it's to have, it's to start, well, we're just starting these two new projects there, but one is about organic fertilizer, large quantities, and the other is about biochar and the blue economy. So we will be using what is there in what's clogging up lakes and waterways, and we'll be turning that into useful product and something which benefits people and captures carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So, and on the subject of fuel shortages and what's going on with Russia and Ukraine and all that sort of thing, then there are coal-fired power stations in Africa and around the world, of course. And we work with an organisation which has machinery that can take industrial hemp waste, and they make fuel bricks out of them. And these fuel bricks have the similar density, energy density and weight to coal. And you can take those bricks and you can put them in a coal-fired power station, and all of a sudden you've got a circular energy power station. Yeah. And so with the plans that we have to expand, to start, well, with the hemp thing, then the toolkit that I've built and it's already got 2 projects running in it. And that is an information system to enable people to set about and make work projects involving all these things that I've mentioned in countries across Africa. Not just, they don't have to involve my company. They can be completely independent. You can go in there, you can find the people you want to undertake a project, get the quotes for all the equipment and make it work. And that will cut down the time it takes to do all that organisation from what my CEO says would normally be about 2 years to 2 weeks to 2 months to get started. And the finance that we have access to is really the only one which is has got all the, it's completely bolted down as far as being you know, authorized, and it's real, and it's real money, and you know, it's we can depend on that to move forward.
Thank you, Tony. I would now like to request Adrita.
Hello.
What is your reflection? What is your perspective? How do you foresee?
Hello. I'm currently a student at McGill University studying environment and development. It's very, very interesting to hear what your perspectives are. Obviously, right now, along with thinking about the environmental justice issues that are happening all over the world, one of the biggest things that I've been reflecting on personally has been the rise in military warfare and the invasion of Ukraine. And also wondering, well, what is that going to do in changing the dialogue about coming together and creating consensus over these adaptations that countries have to make in order to reach the goals, and whether these tensions that are happening right now between NATO and again between Europe and Russia, how is that going to bring people to the table for the next COP, and seeing how they're going to be able to have a discussion and a consensus. So that's something that's been really on my mind right now as a young person as well, seeing how are we going to be able to carry out a lot of these promises when our leaders can't even get on the table to have a discussion. So yes, that's where I'm feeling right now.
Thank you. We had Vanessa Packard, but she is, I think, having problem with her microphone. And also, we had a friend who has joined from Togo, Africa, Nafisato. She is also having power outage. She joined, but she had suffered a power cut outage, and then she is now disconnected. And also two other people from Asia and Pacific region, they have also lost their connectivity because of storm, because of, say, power outrage. They have been disconnected. But anyhow, show is on. I would now like to request Anna to come back again and try to flag what should we do now, especially to galvanize the momentum in terms of climate finance, in terms of climate finance definition, in terms of, say, doubling, quadrupling, say, adaptation finance or finance facility for loss and damage, and also capacity building, and also NDC support and market and non-market mechanism. Yes, I know that you'd love to discuss with climate finance and adaptation finance and mitigation finance. So I would allow you to take your time.
This nice, easy question. No, I guess it ties into what I was saying before about these prioritized areas, and I don't think there is a silver bullet for this, but I do think we need to work through not just the UNFCCC, but also focus on fora like the G7, the G20, when it comes to delivering on these goals that we have. For instance, there were many G20 countries that did not raise ambition last year in the run-up to COP26, and which really need to do so in the run-up to COP27 if we're going to have any chance of keeping 1.5 degrees alive. So here we're talking about countries like Brazil, Mexico, Russia, Indonesia, and so on. So focus on those countries. And then, as I mentioned before, I think it would be important that the nations that did set relatively ambitious targets, so that they get on with implementation. Here, there's a big challenge in the US that Biden is having difficulties getting his bill through Congress. That is a big challenge and can have implications for the wider climate talk. The G7 is really important, not least in the climate finance sphere, I think. We have Germany as chair this year. Climate progressive government is making this a big priority. What can be done within the G7 to build confidence that the adaptation finance will be raised, that the 100 billion will be delivered, and that there will actually be progress made also on the loss and damage finance agenda. And that's an important fora for incubating ideas and for reaching consensus among these governments. But of course, it's very important to listen to the countries most affected by this as well. So encourage strong dialogue with the Climate Vulnerable Forum, with the LDC group, AOSIS, and so on. I think I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Anna. Dylan.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. And I'm just going to emphasize a point which is about convincing policymakers at the national level once they return from COP. I think it's really important. So something else I'm involved in is with Climate Interactive, which is a think tank from MIT, and they do workshops with policymakers around the world, and especially in Washington. So this, I think, is very important for them to understand. Like you're saying, there's not a silver bullet. There's more like a silver buckshot. We have to find ways of multi-solving. So a lot of the time, okay, we're thinking carbon accounting, and that's very important. But let's look as well at microplastics. Let's look at toxicity that's happening because of climate change. So I think this is very important. And I think this, again, should be part of the discussion at COP27, but as well something that we bring back at the national level and try convincing policymakers, people working in the government, but also going out to schools, going out universities, going out to as many people as we can and telling them to go right to the decision makers and make sure that we can convince them at the national level, because it's always momentum is needed to get these policies through. As we're seeing with Ukraine, there's so many things that can happen, or with COVID. And if we want to push through, we still have to find ways of showing how important these are, even if they're not at the moment we're seeing them, but they're going to become even a lot worse, as Anna was pointing out, in the future. So this is very much what we need to understand, the fact that everything is interrelated in a way as well, and that there isn't one solution to it. So very much convince as many, and as well as accepting policies, convince them and make them, establish them, as Anna was saying. So yeah, great.
Thank you. Thank you, Kilan. Felix.
Yeah, it's very interesting actually, because talking about loss and damage, which is always a very contentious issue, let's be honest. And I mean, is it just a developing country sort of situation when you look at places like Australia and California with its forest fires? Should they also be looking at loss and damage? I was talking with James Cameron from Climate recently, about 3 weeks ago, and he felt that loss and damage probably wouldn't actually go anywhere. But when I'm thinking about the funding for things like loss and damage, if it does go somewhere, and adaptation, we have to look at where some of that's coming from. And I think one of the great things about COP26 in Glasgow is that we managed to basically get Article 6 rolled out. And naturally, we need like a lot of kind of governmental kind of cooperation to really sort of formulate interlinked global carbon markets and things like this. Because I think obviously a lot of the funding could come from share of proceeds from the carbon trading, but then we have the issue of who's actually paying the proceed. Is it the buyer? Is it the seller? And I certainly remember being with Kevin Conrad of the Coalition for Rainforest Nations and the delightful Federica Bieta. And they were very disconcerted that people were seeming to put the onus on the seller of the credits, for example, Papua New Guinea, to actually sort of make the share of proceed from the sale. So obviously you could end up, if it's like a $100 trade and $5 is kind of going to the share of proceed rather than actually staying within that country. I'm just wondering if anybody has any thoughts on that as to who should be paying, or should you just like split the difference?
Thank you. Mark Clifford.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Actually, we in the industry and in the private sector, we are mandated to submit the requirement in the government to comply the sustainability reporting, to have that data on how we manage our wastewater, how we manage our energy conservation, how we manage our other resources, those disposing to be waste. These are requirements now by the government to comply, that we need to be we need to help in the protecting our environment. So it's already mandated for us in the industry, the private sector. That's part of the sustainability reporting. It's part of the Securities and Exchange Commission reporting. It's part of the regulation of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. So it's a two-way process, the government and the private sector, and also in the industry and also in the academe, that we need to help to protect our environment. We in the industry, in this professional organization, at the back of my, the logo on my back, that's Pambansang Samahan ng Inhinyero Mechanical. That's a professional organization of mechanical engineers all over the Philippines. I'm the national president in 2022. So part of our program is to help how to combat the climate change. We even have a tie-up with an international organization in California to have a collaboration on the financial climate program and technology transfer. So we as mechanical engineer, we design machine, we design equipment, that it has to be within the standards, and all the refrigerant in our HVAC, all the wastewater should be in the standards, because in the wastewater, it has a big area that it produces more energy, that it will consume more to have an impact on the greenhouse gases also. So
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Tony.
Hello, hi. First of all, can I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Now, it's been mentioned about the different nations sending in their plan for how they will, meet the SDGs and all that sort of thing. How can I get copies of those documents, please?
No, you can have it from UN-DESA and also United Nations Secretary General's office. They also circulate time to time the progress of SDGs. SDG Secretariat, they also do some work. And also there are some gap reports from United Nations Environment Program, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNDRR, Disaster Risk Reduction, UNCBD, a Convention on Biological Diversity, and so on and so forth. Even UN Water, they do the water sector, and Goal 1, Goal 2, Goal 3 to Goal 17. On every goal of SDGs, there are some documents. So you can look at those and see the integration. And we are missing Vanessa Bucket. She was supposed to discuss on the linkage between climate convention and also UNDRR, disaster risk reduction, Sendai framework. But unfortunately, she lost her connectivity. Okay. So we are missing her.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, by the time November comes around, which will be sooner than I think, then if I just thought, if I can get those documents, and with the countries that we're working with, we can help them to achieve the SDGs and therefore enhance their offerings to meet their commitments and so on. So that's a definite thing that I'd like to happen at Sharm el Sheikh, to have established those, not just agreements, but by that time, then projects actually in progress, working. And these are not projects which are just sort of asking for a load of money to fix something that's broke. Right. It is the start. Each one of the projects that we do is the start of a viable commercial operation, and the ones we're doing in Kenya can be replicated in different countries. And I just mentioned one of them to a colleague in Zimbabwe, and he says, "That's a fantastic idea. When can we start doing that?"
Right. So thank you.
Okay. The enthusiasm and the will is there, and it looks like I can get the finance and all this sort of thing. We can make all these things happen. Okay. So that will be wonderful for November.
Thank you. Adrita, can you come?
Yes. I'm very, very interested in a lot of the conversations that have been happening. One of the things that Felix mentioned about who's going to be paying, I think from just a moral perspective, the onus should be on the buyer. Like I'm assuming the intention for cap and trade and carbon accounting is to ensure that these financings are equitable, especially towards countries that are facing more of the climate disaster effects. So for me, it always makes sense to emphasize that over and over, that the people who are most in need of the financing for mitigation is always going to be the countries that are most impacted at the end of the day, and who are struggling, who won't be able to make the financing up. So that's something that we always have to make sure we remember when we're thinking about these designs personally. And to a point that Killian mentioned, this it is something that is very, very interesting. Having a lot of discussions where a lot of COP26 or a lot of these agreements are made, and then when it comes to the national policy and getting these things pushed forward, they're very, very difficult because, and I find that that is probably because when it comes to the national stage of getting an agreement, there seems to be a lot of opposition within countries, within other parties about a lot of these agreements. And one of the things that we've faced in Canada, which is compared to a lot of countries trying to fulfill a lot of their agreements, is that there's still not enough consensus between the parties. And a lot of young people, especially especially in university campuses, we've never let go of the mic of trying to push these agendas forward. Like, I think people who are in university campuses have a very clear idea of decarbonizing a lot of institutions, especially university institutions, but it seems to be that we're not really being heard. So I think that part of policy work has been to not listen to a lot of people who have a very clear idea of what needs to be done. Protests and everything, they've been sending a clear message to policy workers that this is a national issue, but this isn't being taken forth enough by policymakers in the respective countries.
Thank you. Anna, your last message, closing remark.
Thanks. I think I'll just pick up on a few points that were mentioned by the previous speakers. I think, yeah, on kind of Tony's points with these plans and targets, we also need detail. Countries make overarching plans, but then the next step is to kind of think about, okay, what does this actually mean? How do we translate this into concrete projects, ideally bankable projects that can then be financed so that it actually gets translated into something which accelerates decarbonization, and that will get us there. What else was I going to say? I think when it comes to the domestic context, it's really important to be able to demonstrate to your population the opportunities that the transition entails, to make sure that there are reskilling opportunities, that adequate training is provided, that the green transition generates jobs, and that governments put in place measures that can support those affected by the transition away from fossil fuel intensive industries, for instance. So those are a few of the points I'd raise in my closing remarks, but it's been a fascinating discussion. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Thank you very, very much, Anna, Tony, Felix, Adrita, Maria, and of course, Vanessa, Ma, and others who have joined but couldn't keep their, connection intact because of power outrage and other difficulties, connectivity problems. But we had quite interesting discussion, informative conversation, and hopefully we can move forward and have a successful Sharm el-Sheikh COP27 come November. But in between, we have to galvanize the momentum. We have to keep this momentum and keep alive 1.5 degree 2015 landmark Paris Agreement global goal alive. With that positive note, I would like to end here the 68th episode of Climate Conversation at Climate Channel with Kamal Chaudhary, ending here. Thank you very, very much. Thank you all. See you in other episodes.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Kamal.
Thank you.